Shoot her. Shoot her now. I don't care who she is. Harlan Strickland screamed it into the radio, hands shaking for the first time in 30 years. His men on the barge were dying one by one in the dark in the water, and nobody could see who was taking them. No muzzle flash, no footsteps, nothing. Just silence, then a body dropping. Silence, then another. His entire security detail, 12 armed men being dismantled by something they couldn't locate. He slammed his fist against the console. He had buried this secret under classified stamps and dead men's bones for 3 decades. He never accounted for her. He never even knew she existed. She was already underneath them. Before we go any further, if this is your first time here, hit that subscribe button right now and follow this story all the way to the end. Drop your city in the comments below. I want to see exactly how far this story has traveled. Now let's go. The first thing Frank Callahan ever taught Maya about survival wasn't how to shoot. It wasn't how to move through water without leaving a wake, and it wasn't how to read wind or calculate distance or hold her breath until the edges of her vision went white and soft. The first thing Frank ever taught her was something far simpler and far more brutal. He taught her how to disappear. She was 7 years old the first time she understood what that meant. Not disappear like a magic trick. Not disappear like a child playing hide and seek in a warm house with a laughing family. Disappear the way water disappears into the earth quietly, completely, without argument. Until you are just part of what surrounds you. Until you are indistinguishable from the dark. They were in the bayou. It was before dawn, which was always before dawn, because Frank believed the body learned best when the mind was still half asleep and the defenses were low. The water was black and still, and the air smelled like mud, and something older than mud, something animal and green and breathing. Maya stood on the bank in her bare feet, and she looked at that water, and she did not want to go in. "I can see you thinking," Frank said from behind her. He didn't say it mean. He almost never said anything mean, which somehow made everything he said cut deeper. "You're standing there working up a whole argument about why you shouldn't have to do this." Maya said nothing. She was 7. She had already learned that the best answer to most of Frank's observations was silence. "The water isn't the problem," he said. He crouched down beside her, this big, broad man with a face that looked like it had been through a lot of different kinds of weather, and he pointed out at the surface of the bayou where it caught the faintest gray edge of the sky and held it like a mirror. "The water is just water. Your problem is that you're deciding in advance that it's dangerous." "It is dangerous," Maya said. "Yes," Frank agreed, and she thought about it. She was 7, but she was also already something else, something that Frank had been carefully, deliberately shaping with every early morning and every drill and every long silence he gave her when most adults would have filled the air with noise. She thought about his question like it was a puzzle with a real answer. "And it can still be useful," she finally said. Frank looked at her for a moment, then he nodded. "Get in the water, Maya." She got in the water. The cold was a shock. It was always a shock, no matter how many times she did it, and she would do it thousands of times over the years that followed. But that first morning, the cold hit her like something alive, like the bayou was taking hold of her and making a decision about whether to keep her or give her back. She gasped. She pulled her arms tight against her body. "Breathe through it," Frank said from the bank. "It's just sensation. It can't hurt you." She breathed. And slowly, unevenly, her body stopped fighting and started adjusting. And after a while, floating there in the black water in the dark before dawn, something strange happened. She stopped being afraid. Not because she was brave. Not yet. She stopped being afraid because she realized that the water didn't care about her fear. The bayou had been there before her and would be there after her, and her 7-year-old terror was completely irrelevant to it. And that realization, that strange clarifying peace that came from understanding how small her emotions were relative to the world around her, that became the foundation of everything. Frank was not her father by blood. She knew this by the time she was old enough to understand the distinction, and he had never hidden it from her. What he had done instead was refuse to let it define the space between them. He was her guardian, her trainer, her anchor. He had pulled her out of a situation that if she let herself think about it too hard, she couldn't fully reconstruct without her chest tightening, a foster placement, and instability. A series of adults who had looked at her with either too much pity or not enough attention. Frank had stepped in when she was 5 and he had never stepped out. He was former Navy. He didn't talk about it much, which told her more than talking would have. The men who talked odd about their service wanted to be known for it. The men who didn't talk had left pieces of themselves somewhere they couldn't take you back to, and they protected you from that place by keeping it private. Frank protected her from a lot of things by keeping them private. But he prepared her for everything else with a thoroughness that by the time she was a teenager, she recognized as unusual. Not just the water training, though the water training became the center of everything. He taught her marksmanship in conditions no civilian range would permit. He taught her land navigation, tactical movement, communication discipline. He ran her through scenarios, mock hostage situations, pursuit exercises through the bayou at night that most adults would have considered extreme for a child, and that Maya came to consider simply normal. What she did not know, not yet, was why. What she did not know was that Frank had received a file years before he took her in from a man who was already dead by the time Frank opened the envelope. A man who had been a SEAL captain. A man who had known before he died that knowing what he knew was what was going to kill him. A man who was Maya's father. By the time she was 26, Maya Callahan was something that didn't have a clean name in any military classification system. She was not officially active duty. She was not officially contracted. She existed in a space that the government found convenient to leave undefined, which meant she had access to resources and information that should have required a clearance and deniability that suited everyone involved perfectly. Frank had seen to that as well. She was in the bayou the morning the call came, the call that would change everything. Though she didn't know that yet. She was 3 meters underwater, lying completely still on the silted bottom, with her back flat against the mud, her body as relaxed as a sleeping person's, her eyes open in the murk. She was holding her breath. She had been holding her breath for 4 minutes and 12 seconds. She knew the count without counting, the way you know your own heartbeat, not by listening, but by being. Above her on the surface, a target-sized shape floated. She had set it up herself, a wooden disc painted orange simulating a position. From where she lay, she could see it. From where she lay with the right equipment, she could hit it. She had done this drill every morning for the past 2 years, varying the distance, varying the current, varying the time of day. Water light position, these were the variables. The outcome was always the same. She surfaced slowly the way she had learned, making almost no disturbance. And she lay on her back for a moment in the dark green light, and she breathed. Her phone buzzed on the bank. She looked at it without moving for a moment. It was a number she recognized, which did not make it welcome. Government numbers were never welcome in the way that an unknown number might be ignored. Government numbers meant something had already been decided, and she was being informed as a courtesy. She picked it up. Callahan. The voice on the other end was measured, precise, the kind of voice that had spent so long being professional that the professional quality had become indistinguishable from personality. We have a situation developing in the Gulf. We'd like you in New Orleans by 1800. Who's we? She said, a pause. JSOC liaison. Operation is already in planning stages. Your particular skill set has been requested specifically. Requested by who? Another pause, slightly longer. I'll brief you in person. She looked out at the bayou. The orange disc was still floating. Steady, patient, waiting. I'll be there, she said. She told Frank before she left. That was non-negotiable, not because she was required to, and not because Frank would try to stop her, but because Frank was the only person in her life who understood what she was walking into when she walked into something, and not telling him felt like going into the water without checking the current. He was at the kitchen table when she came in, a cup of coffee in front of him, looking out the window at the yard the way he sometimes did in the early morning, like he was watching something she couldn't see. JSOC called, she said. He didn't turn around. I know. She stopped. You know. Now he turned, and his face had that particular quality she had come to recognize over the years. The one where the thing he was feeling and the thing he was showing you had a significant gap between them. I got a call this morning too. Different number, same situation. What does that mean? It means somebody's being careful, Frank said. Too careful. They called you through official channels, and they called me through something else. 2 different lanes to the same destination means whoever's running this wants to make sure both of us are in the room. Maya sat down across from him. Why would they want you? Frank was quiet for a moment. He picked up his coffee and looked at it like the answer might be in there. Because of who asked for you, he said finally. I think it's connected to something old. Something I've been waiting a long time to be connected to. Frank. She said his name the way she had learned to say it when she needed him to stop being careful with her and just say the thing. Tell me what you're not saying. He set the coffee down. He looked at her directly, which with Frank meant he was about to say something that cost him something. Your father's name was Captain David Reyes, he said. He was a SEAL officer. He died 16 years ago, and the official story of how he died is a lie. The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, a bird was doing something distant and unconcerned. You knew him? Maya said. It wasn't a question. I served under him, Frank said, for 3 years. He was the best officer I ever worked under, and I have worked under some very good officers. And 2 years before he died, he came to me with something. A file. Evidence he had been collecting about a program called Leafy, a classified program, something he had stumbled into and could not unsee. What kind of program? Frank's jaw was tight. The kind the government runs when it wants to do something it can't officially do. Chemical weapons research. Development. And when the program needed to be ended quietly, the kind of program that makes the people who knew about it quietly end too. Maya felt something settle in her chest. Not settle like calm, settle like a stone dropping into deep water, that slow, certain descent. He was killed because of what he knew. He was killed because he was going to say it, Frank said. There's a difference. Knowing it they could live with. They had others who knew. But your father was going to bring it out into the light, and they could not let that happen. And the file, he gave it to me before he died. Told me to keep it safe. Told me if anything happened to him to find his daughter. Frank looked at her steadily. I found you 6 months later. Maya was very still. She had spent her whole life feeling like there was a shape in the dark that she couldn't quite see some organizing principle behind the way Frank had trained her, behind the particular emphasis on water and silence and the kind of patience that borders on something else, something colder. She had never pushed him on it because some part of her had understood without being able to say it that the answer would change the weight of everything. She had been right. So this operation, she said slowly, the Caspian Star, whatever JSOC is calling me in for. I don't think it's about what they're saying, it's about, Frank said. No, she agreed. I think it's about Leafy. I think so too. She stood up, looked down at him for a moment. Are you going to tell me why you've been preparing me for this my whole life? Or are we going to keep that one in the quiet column a while longer? Frank almost smiled. Almost. Let's get to New Orleans first, he said. There'll be time for the rest. The briefing was held in a building near the waterfront that was officially a shipping logistics company and unofficially something else entirely. Maya had been in enough of these rooms to stop noticing the discrepancy. The people in them were real enough. Commander Sylvia Vance was at the head of the table when Maya walked in. She was a compact woman in her late 40s, silver starting at her temples with the posture of someone who had spent decades being the sharpest person in a room full of people who didn't want to admit it. She looked at Maya the way senior officers looked at assets with a rapid practice assessment that clocked everything and committed to nothing. Beside her sat Senior Chief Garrett Holt. Maya had not been told Holt would be here. She registered that fact without showing it. Holt was taller than he looked in briefing photos, with a face built for cold weather, all flat planes and economy. He watched her walk to her seat with something that might have been curiosity and might have been caution. Callahan, Vance said by way of greeting, you've been read into the Caspian Star operation. I've been read into the existence of it, Maya said. I haven't been told what you actually think is on it. Chemical precursors, Vance said. The vessel is registered out of Cyprus, third-party flag crew of 14. Our intelligence suggests it's carrying about 4 metric tons of precursor compounds for a nerve agent we haven't been able to fully characterize. The vessel is currently 2 days out from a Gulf port. Which port? That's what we're still establishing. Maya looked at the satellite image on the table. She had seen cargo vessels before. She had done maritime work before. None of that was why they had called her specifically. Where do I go in? She asked. Vance slid another photograph across the table. We anticipate a boarding scenario, standard maritime assault modified for the vessel's particular layout. She paused. Your role is overwatch and aquatic infiltration. In the event the boarding team is compromised, you're the contingency. What kind of compromised? Holt spoke for the first time. His voice was quieter than she'd expected considered. The kind where the ship knows we're coming before we're there. He looked at Vance, then back at Maya. We have some concerns about the intelligence sourcing on this one. The room was quiet. Maya looked at him. He held her look without shifting. What kind of concerns? She said. The kind, Holt said, that suggests someone on our side of this wants us on that ship more than they want what's on it. And there it was, dropped into the clean official air of the briefing room like a stone into black water. Maya said nothing. She looked at the photograph of the Caspian Star, this unremarkable cargo vessel floating in the Gulf, and she thought about Frank's face that morning at the kitchen table. She thought about a dead man named David Reyes who had tried to bring something into the light. She thought about what happens to people who know too much when the people they're working for need them not to know it anymore. I'm in, she said. She found Holt alone on the pier an hour after the briefing. He was looking out at the water with the settled stillness of a man who had done a lot of waiting in his life and had made his peace with it. How long have you had the concern? She said without preamble. He didn't seem surprised she'd followed him. About 3 weeks since the intelligence package came in. He glanced at her sideways. You're here because Frank Callahan asked for you. She kept her expression neutral. Frank doesn't have that kind of reach. Frank has exactly that kind of reach, Holt said. He just doesn't use it very often. When he does, it means something. He turned to face her. He told me to trust you. Frank Callahan, who has never in 20 years of my knowing him, told me to trust anyone told me that specifically about you. I want to understand why. Maya looked at him. She was measuring him the way she had been taught to measure everything, not just what was on the surface, but the weight beneath it, the shape of what wasn't being said. Holt was a careful man. He was also, she decided, an honest one. The two qualities together were rarer than either alone. How much do you know about Project Leafy? She said. He went very still. Not the stillness of someone who didn't know the name. The stillness of someone who had just had a door they thought was locked swing open. Where did you hear that name? He said quietly. From the man who gave me everything I know, she said. And I think you know more about it than you've told anyone in that room. Holt turned back to the water. The evening was coming in from the Gulf, that particular Gulf evening that carries the smell of everything salt and petroleum and something old and brackish underneath. I had a friend, he said, 8 years ago. Good operator, good man. He started asking questions about a classified program. He was told to stop. He didn't stop. He paused. He had an accident. The kind that isn't an accident. That kind, yes. They stood there together in the gathering dark. Two people who had both been pointed at the same shape in the dark from different angles and who were only now beginning to understand that what they were looking at was the same thing. We're not going on that ship to find chemical weapons, Maya said. No, Holt agreed. We're going on that ship because somebody wants us there. Yes, and we're going anyway. He looked at her. For a moment, something moved across his face, not quite a smile, but close. The expression of a man who had decided after a long, careful process of deciding that he was exactly where he was supposed to be. We're going anyway, he said. That night, Maya went back to the bayou. Not the bayou near New Orleans, not the operational zone back to Frank's bayou. Their bayou, the one she had been going into since she was 7 years old, and the water was cold and she was afraid. She drove out in the dark and she stood on the bank and she looked at the water, and the water was the same as it had always been. Patient, indifferent, complete. She thought about her father. She had been thinking about him all day, but there's a difference between a thought you're carrying and a thought you're facing, and now she let herself face it. Captain David Reyes, a man she had no memory of, who had died when she was barely real enough to be a person who had known something dangerous and had paid the fullest possible price for knowing it. Who had left behind in the hands of a careful, loyal man a file and a daughter and the instructions to connect them. She thought about Frank, who had taken those instructions and fulfilled them with a completeness that now that she understood the shape of it, she had no words for. He hadn't just raised her, he had prepared her. He had spent 21 years building something precise, something specific, something aimed at a target she hadn't known existed. Every morning in the water, every drill in the dark, every lesson about silence and patience, and becoming invisible, about letting the bayou take you in and give you back, changed all of it, had been pointing at this, at the Caspian Star, at Project Leafy, at Harlan Strickland, whose name she did not yet know, but whose shape she could already feel in the dark. The shape of the person who had signed the order that killed her father. And who was she? Understood now with a cold and certain clarity, going to answer for it. She stepped off the bank and into the water. The cold came. The bayou closed around her. She let herself sink. And in the dark beneath the surface, in the silence that water creates when you let it take you completely, Maya Callahan became very still and very patient and completely invisible. Just the way Frank had taught her. Just the way her father had, without knowing it, made necessary. She held her breath for 5 minutes and 14 seconds. When she surfaced, her mind was clear. She was ready. The morning they left for the Gulf, Frank didn't say goodbye. He said, "Come back with the file." Maya understood the difference. Goodbye was for people who weren't sure. Come back with the file was a mission. She rowed out with Holt's team on a Coast Guard support vessel that was officially a fisheries inspection platform, and unofficially something that carried a lot more firepower than fish inspectors typically needed. The team was 6 operators plus Maya, all of them running quiet, all of them in that particular pre-operation headspace where conversation becomes selective and every word costs something. Holt ran through the plan one final time at the back of the vessel, his voice low and steady, the kind of voice that had given 1,000 briefings and knew how to carry information without carrying panic. We board at 0200, crew of 14 likely armed, likely aware something is off, even if they don't know what. Our primary objective is the cargo hold, confirm the presence of precursor compounds, secure samples tag for follow-on teams. He paused and looked around the group. Secondary objective is any documentation on the bridge. Manifest communications logs, anything that tells us where the ship was and who it was talking to. One of the operators, a compact man named Dorsey, raised his hand slightly. Rules of engagement. Minimum force to accomplish the objective, Holt said. We're not here to start a war. We're here to confirm intel. Dorsey nodded, then quietly, just to the man beside him, he said, "Intel that somebody worked real hard to make sure we had." Holt heard it, he didn't correct it. Maya stood slightly apart from the group, as she often did, not because she was unfriendly, but because the space between her and other people in a pre-operation context was something she had learned to use. You heard more from the edge, you saw more. And what she heard was a team that was professionally prepared and quietly uncertain, which was a combination she recognized as dangerous and also honest. The dangerous kind of honest. She checked her equipment for the 4th time, not because she thought something was wrong, because the act of checking was itself a form of settling, of bringing the body in line with the mind. Frank had taught her that too. At 2300 hours, the Caspian Star appeared on radar at 11 miles. At 2330, they could see her running lights. At midnight exactly, Holt touched Maya's shoulder and said, "You're in the water in 90 minutes. You good?" "I'm good," she said. He studied her face for a moment with that particular quality of attention he had, the kind that didn't perform itself. "Frank, tell you what this is really about. He told me part of it." "I think we're walking into something designed," Holt said. "I want you to know that going in. If I'm right, the moment we board that ship, somebody somewhere is going to know it, and they're going to move pieces around aboard we can't see." "Then we move faster than they do," Maya said. He nodded. It wasn't an answer that solved anything. It was an answer that acknowledged the problem and committed to it anyway, which was the only kind of answer that mattered. Maya went over the side at 01:15, 45 minutes ahead of the boarding team, into water that was dark and warm and smelled of diesel and open sea. She went in without a sound. The surface closed over her like a hand. She was carrying a rebreather, a compact waterproof rifle rig, and the particular quality of stillness she had been building since she was 7 years old and standing on a bayou bank in the dark. She oriented herself to the vessel by sound, the low throb of the engines, the deep vibration of a ship that didn't know it was being approached, and she started moving through the water toward the hull. This was her element. Not more than the land, not more than the air, but differently. In the water, everything the world used to track you, your shadow, your sound, your silhouette, became irrelevant. You became part of the medium. You became the dark. She reached the hull at 01:38 and held position, one hand flat against the steel, feeling the vibration of the ship's heart against her palm. Above her, the boarding team was 12 minutes out. She listened through the water for any sign of alarm, any change in the engine rhythm, or the footstep patterns she could feel through the hull. Nothing yet. She moved toward the stern where the waterline dropped low enough that she could hear through the steel, the occasional shape of voices indistinct but present. Then something changed. The engine rhythm shifted. Not stop shifted. A subtle change in throttle that someone not paying attention would miss entirely. Maya felt it through the hull and through the water, simultaneously a harmonic change that told her the ship had just altered its operational state. She pulled herself up just enough to clear the surface and keyed her comm. "Holt, something changed on the engine." His response was immediate. "What kind of change?" "Throttle adjustment. They're not stopping, but they're doing something deliberate. Could be routine, could be a response to something." A 3-second pause. "We're still 8 minutes out. Hold position." She went back under. The next 4 minutes were quiet in the way that certain silences are not actually quiet. They are full of everything that hasn't happened yet, pressing against the air like weather coming in. Maya held position against the hull, and she waited, and she counted, and she thought about what a deliberate throttle adjustment meant. It meant someone was awake who should maybe be sleeping. It meant a decision had been made. At 01:44, she heard the first sound that didn't belong. It came through the steel as a distorted thump, too sharp and too directional to be engine noise. She identified it in less than a second because she had heard that sound before in training and operation in the bayou when Frank ran her through live fire scenarios that no civilian range would permit. Someone on that ship had just chambered around. She keyed the comm. "Holt, abort approach. They're armed and they're ready." "Say again." "They are waiting for you. This is a reception." She kept her voice completely flat. This was not the time for emphasis. Emphasis took time. "Turn your boats around. Now!" The silence that followed lasted exactly 2 seconds, which in the middle of an operation is a very long time. "All units hold position," Holt said. His voice had changed, had compressed into something harder and more efficient. "Callahan, I need eyes." "I can get you eyes in 6 minutes. You've got 4. She was already moving. She came up the aft anchor chain, hand over hand, still dripping, and cleared the rail in a single motion that she had practiced until it was muscular memory rather than thought. She was on the deck before her mind had finished registering that she was out of the water. She moved immediately to cover behind a ventilation housing, and she went still and she assessed. What she saw made something cold move through her chest. The deck was not empty. On a cargo vessel at 01:45 in the morning, the deck should have been empty. Maybe one watch position, a board sailor doing his time. What she saw instead was 3 men in tactical positions spread in a pattern that was not random, that was not incidental, that was deliberate and professional, and had been placed specifically to cover the approach angles of a boarding team. These were not sailors. She keyed the comm one more time. "Holt, this ship has been staged. They have tactical teams on deck. Minimum 3 positions I can see from my angle, likely more I can't." The silence this time lasted 1 second. "That's confirmation," Holt said, and his voice had gone very quiet. "Full abort. All units full abort egress to Rally Point Delta." Maya stayed exactly where she was pressed against the ventilation housing, breathing in the controlled rhythm Frank had drilled into her until it was automatic. The 3 men on deck had not seen her. She was wet and dark and still, and she had emerged from the water in a position they were not watching, because they were watching the sea, watching the obvious approach lanes, watching for the thing they had been told was coming. They were not watching for someone who was already there. She heard Holt's boats turn in the water below. She felt the relief of it, her team pulling back out of the trap. And then immediately she felt something else because she was good at this, and the next thought came fast. If the deck was staged, the cargo hold was staged. If the cargo hold was staged, there were no chemical weapons. If there were no chemical weapons, the entire intelligence package that had built this operation had been constructed for one purpose: to get them here. She pressed herself flatter against the housing, and she thought with the speed that she had spent years cultivating the kind of thinking that doesn't feel like thinking, because it moves faster than deliberate thought and lands on answers before the question is finished forming. Someone had built this operation. Someone had constructed the intelligence, had created the evidence of the Caspian Star, had placed it in front of JSOC in a way that produced exactly this response, A team in the water in the Gulf in the middle of the night, identifiable, documentable, and walking directly into whatever was waiting on the other side. This was not a mission. This was a demonstration. She needed to know who was watching. She moved. She cleared 3 deck positions in 12 minutes without being seen, using the dark and the ship's own vibration to cover the small sounds of her movement, pressing into shadows between equipment housings and containers, reading the sight lines of each tactical position, and moving through the gaps between them, the way water moves through cracks in stone, finding the path of least resistance and exploiting it completely. At the 4th position, she stopped because the 4th position was different. The man there wasn't watching the water. He was watching a screen. A small tablet held at an angle that told her it was active and live, and on it, she could see not clearly, but enough of feed. Multiple feeds. Small rectangles of greenish night vision video. He was watching Holt's boats. She stared at that screen for 3 full seconds, and she understood that this was the thing, this was the center of it. Someone on this ship was providing real-time surveillance of Holt's team to someone else, and that someone else was somewhere that required a data link, which meant they were not on this ship and not in the immediate area, and the information was going somewhere deliberate. She photographed the screen with the compact camera she carried, and she backed away from the position the way she had come. She was back in the water in 4 minutes. She came up on the comm immediately. Holt, they have surveillance on your boats. Live feed. Someone on that ship is watching you and transmitting your position in real time. The quality of the silence that followed was different from the previous ones. This was the silence of a man revising a complete picture. How live, Holt said. Live enough that they knew your approach angle before you were inside visual range. Which means the intelligence leak isn't in the planning stage, Holt said, and she could hear him working it through his voice, doing that compression thing it did when he was moving fast. It's in the execution. They're watching us in real time, which means someone is feeding current operational data, not historical. Someone inside the operation, Maya said. Another silence. Shorter this time because Holt was fast and the conclusion was not a comfortable one, but it was the only one the facts supported. Rally Point Delta, he said. Everyone, now. Rally Point Delta was a position 3 nautical miles southeast, a coordinate that had not been in the original briefing package and that Holt had inserted into the operational plan at the last minute without explanation. Maya had noted it at the time and filed it away as a sign of exactly the kind of caution that the situation apparently warranted. She reached the rally point ahead of the boats, having swum the 3 miles in the water with the rebreather, and she pulled herself up onto the rubber gunnel of the lead vessel, while Holt looked at her with an expression that contained surprise and also the particular kind of appreciation that operators felt for other operators who did things that didn't entirely make sense but worked. That's 3 miles, he said. The water's warm, she said. He handed her a towel without comment. Then he pulled the team in tight, 4 operators and Maya on 2 inflatables in the dark Gulf. And he said quietly, we have a problem. Dorsey, who had the instincts of someone who had survived by being exactly right about bad situations, said, how big? Big, Holt said. The Caspian Star is not a target, it's a mechanism. Someone built this operation to put us in the water tonight, to have us attempting a boarding that could be observed and documented, which means someone is building a case. He paused. Or covering one. Covering what? Another operator said. Holt looked at Maya. The look was a question. She answered it. Project Leafy, she said. The name dropped into the group like a physical thing. 2 of the operators showed recognition. That was interesting and also alarming. A classified program 30 years old involving the development and concealment of chemical weapons. The program was shut down. The people who knew about it were systematically eliminated. And now somehow it's active again, not the program, but the cover-up of it. And we just got used as a prop in that cover-up. The silence that followed this was the silence of people reconfiguring, of professionals whose training told them to adapt and whose instincts were screaming that something was deeply wrong with the entire situation they were standing inside. Dorsey said very quietly, who sent us out here? Nobody answered him, because the answer was the thing they were all already thinking, and saying it out loud would make it real in a way that none of them were entirely ready for. Holt pulled out a waterproof field notebook and started writing. Maya watched him write dates, names, the specific sequence of events that had produced this moment, and she understood what he was doing. He was building a record. He was creating documentation that existed outside of any official channel that would survive whatever happened next. Frank had done exactly the same thing. 16 years ago, a dead man had done exactly the same thing. She thought about her father constructing his file in the weeks before he died. She thought about the particular kind of courage that took not the courage of a firefight, which was its own thing, which was real but also shaped by adrenaline and trained response, but the slower, colder courage of sitting down and writing out the truth when you know that the truth is what's going to get you killed. Holt, she said. He looked up. The transmitter on that ship, the feed they were running, it was going somewhere specific, which means there's a destination we can trace. She pulled out the camera with the photographs she'd taken of the screen, and I got the device signature. He looked at the photographs for a long moment. Then he looked at her. You went up on the ship, he said. I needed eyes. I told you to hold position. You needed eyes, she said simply. He stared at her for another moment. Then something moved across his face. Not quite a smile, not quite the other thing, something between. Frank said you'd do exactly this. Frank's very accurate about most things. Holt looked back at the photograph. This device signature, if we can get it to a tech analyst, I trust someone who isn't inside the operational chain. We can find out where that feed was going. Do you have someone like that? I know a woman in Pensacola who owes me a very significant favor, he said. We need to be off this water before dawn, and we need to be very careful about who we tell that we came back. Maya understood him exactly. When you discover that the operation you're part of is compromised at a level you can't clearly define, the instinct is to report it. The training says report it. The protocol says report it. But protocol assumes the person you're reporting to isn't part of the problem. Vance, she said, do you trust her? Holt was quiet for a long moment. On the water around them, the Gulf was doing what the Gulf did, indifferent and enormous and continuing. I trust that she believes what she told us, he said carefully. I don't trust that what she told us is what's actually happening. That's a distinction. It's the only distinction that matters right now. She thought about Commander Vance at the head of that briefing table. The silver at her temples, the precise measured quality of everything she said, a career built on doing things correctly, on following the process, on being the most capable professional in the room. And somewhere above her in the chain, someone who had been using that professionalism the way you use a good tool for its reliability, for its precision, for the fact that a capable professional would execute a mission without questioning its real purpose. She doesn't know, Maya said. It wasn't entirely a question. I hope she doesn't know, Holt said, because the alternative is considerably worse. He gave the signal, and the two inflatables turned southeast, moving away from the Caspian Star, and its staged deck, and its live surveillance feed, and its empty cargo holds moving through the dark, warm water of the Gulf, toward a shore where everything was going to be different now, where the shape of the operation they'd been handed had revealed itself to be something entirely other than what it claimed. Maya sat at the bow and watched the dark. Behind them, the running lights of the Caspian Star were still visible, still steady, the ship holding position like something patient that knew it didn't have to chase you because the trap was already set somewhere ahead. She thought about what Frank had said. She thought about the file. She thought about 30 years of buried truth and dead men and a little girl pulled out of an unstable foster placement by a Navy veteran who had made a promise to a dead captain. She thought about what it took to build a lie that size. And she thought with the particular cold clarity that deep water had always given her about what it was going to take to dismantle it. The shore came up out of the dark, and they cut the engines, and they came in quiet. And somewhere in a building with no windows, a man who had signed an elimination order with the same pen he used for his Christmas cards watched a screen go dark as the feed from the Caspian Star cut out, and he leaned back in his chair, and he said to the man beside him, "Find out where they went." He was not yet afraid. That would come later. They came off the water at 0420, and Frank was already there. Maya didn't ask how he knew. Frank always knew. It was one of the things about him that she had stopped questioning around the same time she stopped questioning why the bayou was cold in the morning. It simply was. And demanding an explanation for it wasted energy that could be spent on something useful. He was standing beside a truck at the edge of a gravel lot 3 blocks from the waterfront, and when she came toward him, he looked at her the way he always looked at her after an operation. A fast, complete scan, top to bottom, checking for injury before anything else. Only after he was satisfied that she was physically intact Did his eyes come up to her face and ask the real question? Empty, she said. The whole ship was a stage. Frank nodded, not surprised. The kind of nod that confirms what you already knew, but had hoped you were wrong about. Holt came up behind Maya, and the two men looked at each other with the particular recognition of people who had served in the same world without ever serving together, who shared a common language, even without a common history. Frank extended his hand. Holt took it. You look like you found what I told you you'd find, Frank said. I found the edge of something very large, Holt said. And I'd like your help understanding how large. Frank looked at him steadily. You'd better come inside. The inside was a motel room that Frank had taken under a name that wasn't his paid cash, chosen for its position at the end of a row with sightlines in 3 directions. Maya had been in enough of Frank's safe rooms to recognize the criteria. She sat on the edge of the bed. Holt took the chair. Frank stood, which was what Frank did when he was managing something with a lot of moving parts. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and produced an envelope. Not new old, the edges worn soft, with handling the kind of wear that came from being opened and resealed many times over many years. He set it on the table between them. Project Leafy started in 1987, Frank said. It was a black program, SAP level, completely off the books. The official purpose was defensive research understanding chemical weapons in order to develop countermeasures. That's what the people at the bottom of it believed they were doing. But the people at the top, Holt said, the people at the top were doing something else. Frank's voice was even controlled, the voice of a man who had spent a long time carrying something heavy and had learned to carry it without showing the weight. They were developing deployable compounds, weaponized agents, the kind of thing that international treaty explicitly prohibited, which is why the program was classified at a level where the relevant oversight committees never saw it. Maya had heard the outline of this from Frank the morning before they left. But hearing it here in this room with Holt's face going through its controlled series of reactions across the table, the weight of it landed differently. For 30 years, she said. For 30 years, Frank confirmed. The program ran under 4 different operational names. Leafy was the third. By the time your father encountered it, it had been running for 12 years and had produced compounds that were tested. He stopped, chose the next word carefully. Tested in ways that produced casualties that were attributed to other causes. The room was very quiet. Domestically, Holt said. His voice had gone flat in the way that voices go flat when the speaker is managing something that would otherwise be loud. Some domestically, some in theater during operations where the conditions were controlled enough to observe results. Frank picked up the envelope and held it without opening it. David Reyes found the testing documentation. Not by looking for it, he wasn't investigating anything. He was reviewing a logistics manifest for a completely unrelated operation, and he found a discrepancy that led him somewhere he was never supposed to go. Maya watched her guardian's face as he said her father's name. There was something in it, something old, and not entirely resolved, the residue of a grief that had been lived with long enough to become structural. He came to you, Ma, she said. He came to me because he didn't know who else to trust, Frank said. He had already tried one official channel, and the response had been a very polite, very firm conversation with someone he outranked, who made it clear that the conversation he was trying to have was one that could not be had. He set the envelope back down. He gave me the file. He told me he was going to try one more channel, a congressional contact he believed was clean. He told me that if it didn't work, he was going to go to a journalist. And then he died, Maya said. 6 days later, Frank said. Training accident, parachute malfunction. 3-person board of inquiry, closed findings, family notified. He looked at Maya directly. You were 2 years old. She had known this intellectually. She had known it since Frank told her at the kitchen table. But knowing something and hearing it stated in a room at 04:30 in the morning, after you have just come off an operation that confirmed the enemy was real and organized and currently active, those were different kinds of knowing. Who authorized it? Holt said. Not a question, a direction. Frank opened the envelope. The documents inside were copies she could see that made on what looked like older equipment, the reproduction slightly uneven, the kind of copies that predated everything digital. He spread 3 pages on the table. The program had an oversight structure that existed parallel to its official non-existence, Frank said. A steering committee of 4 people. a deputy director of operations at CIA since deceased, a flag officer in the Joint Chiefs also deceased, a private contractor who provided logistics and deniability. He touched the third page, and a man named Harlan Strickland, who at the time held a senior position in the Defense Intelligence Agency and who currently serves as an advisor to the National Security Council. Holt looked at the page. He was very still. "Strickland," he said. "You know the name," Frank said. "I know the name," Holt said. The flatness in his voice had deepened into something else. He was in the briefing chain for this operation. Not directly 2 levels up, but his office signed off on the intelligence authorization that produced the package we were handed. The silence that followed that sentence was the longest one of the night. Maya looked at Holt. Holt looked at Frank. Frank looked at the pages on the table with the expression of a man who has been waiting a very long time for a moment to arrive and is now taking a careful account of it. "He built the operation," Maya said. "Strickland built the Caspian Star operation. He constructed the intelligence, he put it into the system. He let it work its way down through the chain until it produced a JSOC team in the Gulf in the middle of the night and attempting a boarding of a ship he controlled. To document us," Holt said, "to create a record of an unauthorized or what could be framed as unauthorized military action in civilian waters. Something that could be used." "Used how?" Maya asked. Holt leaned back. His jaw was tight. "If this ever comes out, Leafy the testing Strickland's role in it, he needs something to throw at the people coming after him. He needs to be able to say that the people who discovered it conducted themselves illegally, that the investigation was compromised by unauthorized actors. It muddies everything, creates enough noise that the real story gets buried under the procedural one." Frank said, "He's done it before, twice. Both times someone got close to Leafy. The response was not to silence them directly. That's too visible now, too many eyes, but to discredit them, to make the messenger the story." Maya thought about this. She thought about the precision of it, the patience of a man who had been maintaining a cover-up for 30 years and had evolved his methods as the environment changed, who had moved from elimination to discrediting because the landscape demanded it, who was in his way intelligent and adaptable and thoroughly without conscience. "He doesn't know we aborted," she said. Both men looked at her. "His feed cut when we pulled back," she said. "He knows we didn't board the ship, but he doesn't know what we found. He doesn't know I went up on that deck. He doesn't know about the transmitter photographs." She paused. "He thinks the operation failed on its own terms. He thinks we came back empty." Holt was ahead of her. She could see it in his face. "Which means he doesn't know what we know," he said slowly. "And he's going to assume we're going to report the mission as a failed boarding, chalk it up to bad intel, and move on. He's going to assume we're still inside his story," Maya said. Frank picked up the envelope and looked at it for a moment. "Your father tried to bring this out through officials' channel," what he said. "That got him killed. I've been sitting on this file for 16 years because I couldn't find a way to surface it that wouldn't produce the same result." He looked at Maya. "But Strickland just made a mistake. He put both of you in the same room and the same operation pointed at the same target. He thought he was using you. He doesn't understand what he actually assembled." Holt's phone buzzed on the table. He looked at it. His face changed. "Vance," he said. The room went tight. He answered it on speaker, a decision that was itself a statement about where they were and what they were doing. "Holt." Vance's voice came through precise and controlled, but underneath it, like a current under still water, was something that might have